The committee meets today to hear Admiral Mike Rodgers. You know, you have more titles than anybody else down here. You really do. As the commander,
I have that going for me, sir.
Commander of the U.S. Cyber Command, Director of the National Security Agency, and Chief of the Central Security Service. And given your upcoming retirement, it might be this is the last time you'll be dropping in. Do you think that will happen? We'll miss you. Well, as the recent National Defense Strategy identified, renewed great power competition with Russia and China, and that kind of goes along with what General Dunford said when he said that we are losing our qualitative and quantitative edge as we move into this 3-2 or this 2-3 National Defense Strategy. As we approach the 8th anniversary of Cyber Command, we should recognize the remarkable progress you've made in taking what was a very niche warfighting concept and establishing around it a full-fledged warfighting command. Later this year, we anticipate that you will achieve full operational capability for the 6,200-person cyber mission force. Despite the many successes, there are still significant challenges. The committee remains concerned about a hollow cyber force due to the lack of priority across the services to deliver the required tools and capabilities and personnel. Efforts have improved, but the fact remains that we are not where we need to be, and that we lack the bench strength necessary. And in the other area, and I'll have some questions about this during our question time, is the fact that we're, I think, somewhat of a disadvantage with responsibilities that are spread, as I mentioned to you a few minutes ago, across DOD, DHS, and the FBI, with little semblance of coordination. We can't just wait for a major cyber attack and then try to get this thing right. And we look at some of the other countries that they have got this more centralized and coordinated, so we need to address that to see if maybe we got some improvements that we can make structurally. Senator Reid.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and Admiral Rodgers, welcome. And since we are holding the confirmation hearing for your successor later this week, this is likely your last appearance before the committee. So let me thank you for decades of service to the country, to the NSA and Cyber Command. You've done an extraordinary job. Thank you, sir. One of the great threats facing our democracy is influence operations, a type of information warfare which are mostly conducted through cyberspace, the domain and theater of operations of Cyber Command. Russia engaged in a sophisticated influence campaign during the 2016 election cycle. China has been engaged in information operations against their own citizens in order to control their access to information and their behavior, and is becoming more active abroad. They have also engaged in massive theft of intellectual property conducted against U.S. companies for their own economic gain. North Korea's attack on Sony America was an attempt to silence an entertainment company from exercising its right to free speech and thereby send a message across the world. These efforts by our adversaries highlight some of our vulnerabilities in this area, which I hope you will address today. While our adversaries are freely conducting information operations, Cyber Command is still predominantly designed to conduct technical operations to either defend or attack computer systems, to sustain or impede the functioning of computers and networks. It is not built to deal with the content of the information flowing through cyberspace, with the cognitive dimension of information warfare. Cyber Command has made important strides in the last year in the cognitive dimension in the struggle against ISIS, but still has a long way to go, and must also focus on the strategic level of engagement, not merely on operational tactical support to engage forces. Other organizations and officials in the Defense Department are responsible for what the Department calls psychological and deception operations. But those officials and components in turn have no expertise or capabilities in the technical aspects of cyberspace operations. This is a serious handicap when we are confronted with adversaries like Russia that conduct information warfare that combines the technical and cognitive dimensions to manipulate perceptions through cyberspace. Because we have separated these things organizationally and in terms of policy and strategy, we are greatly disadvantaged when it comes to countering an adversary's integrated operations and when it comes to conducting our own information operations through cyberspace. The FY18 NDAA included a provision, co-sponsored by Senator McCain and myself, which directs the Secretary of Defense to designate a senior official to lead the integration of all Defense Department components and capabilities that contribute to information warfare and to develop specific strategies, plans, and capabilities to operate effectively in this arena to counter and deter adversaries. I'm eager to learn how Cybercommand is responding to this legislation. As stressed in the newly released National Defense Strategy, Russia and other adversaries have mastered the art of conducting systematic aggression against the United States and its interests and allies while staying just below the level that would be considered armed aggression or an act of war. As the DNI testified recently to the Senate Intelligence Committee, adversaries are using cyber operations to achieve strategic objectives and will continue to do so unless they face clear repercussions. Adversaries are achieving strategic effects incrementally by applying constant pressure through cyberspace against the sources of our national power. In addition to tools such as sanctions, diplomacy, indictments, and public shaming, we must meet not only Russia but all adversaries where the struggle is taking place in the information sphere. As part of this, we need to engage in blunt information operations against us at their source by disrupting them in cyberspace as they unfold. The national mission teams of the Cyber Mission Force were created to conduct exactly these missions. According to the Defense Department's official cyber strategy, the national mission teams were created to defend the country by disrupting ongoing cyber attacks of, quote, significant consequence. Some of these influence operations in cyberspace are directed against the foundations of American democracy, the free expression of Americans' political views, the voting booth, and through our political parties and campaign organizations. Surely such acts meet the threshold of significant consequences, justifying the use of the national mission teams under the Defense Department's cyber strategy. The members of the Cyber Subcommittee, led by Senators Round and Senator Nelson, have made this point numerous times, and I want to thank them for their leadership on this issue. Admiral Rodgers, I'm also interested in your views on this issue. Finally, I understand the presidential leadership is critical on these issues. I raised this matter with the Director of National Intelligence and each of the intelligence agency directors, including you, Admiral Rodgers, at a recent public hearing of the Intelligence Committee. The very disappointing answer that I received is that the President has not directed any action on countering these threats. In addition, countering these threats requires not only the Defense Department integrate all the components of information warfare, it is essential to integrate capabilities and authorities of all the national security and law enforcement organizations across the government as a whole. This, too, requires leadership that so far has been lacking. Admiral Rodgers, thank you again for your service and the service to your family, and I look forward to your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Reed. I regretfully say that Senator Rounds, who does chair the subcommittee, will not be here today, or actually this week, with the loss of his father, so we all regret that. Admiral Rodgers.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Inhofe, Ranking Member Reed, and distinguished members of the committee, thank you for your enduring support and the opportunity to talk with you today about the hardworking men and women of United States Cyber Command. But first, I'd like to take a moment to extend our thoughts and prayers to Chairman McCain and his family, and to voice our support for him as he undertakes this tough health fight. And Senator McCain, keep fighting. Look forward to you getting back, sir. On behalf of the men and women of the United States Cyber Command, I'm here to discuss the command's posture and describe how we prepare for and execute operations in the cyberspace domain to support the nation's defense against increasingly sophisticated and capable adversaries. The cyberspace domain that existed when we first established Cyber Command nearly over 8 years ago has evolved dramatically. Today, we face threats that have increased in sophistication, magnitude, intensity, volume, and velocity, threatening our vital national security interests and economic well-being. China and Russia, whom we see as peer or near-peer competitors in cyberspace, remain our greatest concern. But rogue regimes like Iran and North Korea have growing capabilities and are using aggressive methods to conduct malicious cyberspace activities. Further, several states have mounted sustained campaigns against our cleared defense contractors to scout and steal key enabling technologies, capabilities, and systems. Our adversaries have grown more emboldened, conducting increasingly aggressive activities to extend their influence without fear of significant consequence. We must change our approaches and responses here if we are to change this dynamic. While the domain has evolved, Cyber Command's 3 missions areas endure. Our first priority is the defense of the Department of Defense Information Network, or the DODN. Second, we enable other Joint Force commanders by delivering effects in and through cyberspace. Finally, we defend the nation against cyber threats through support to DHS and others when directed to do so by the President or the Secretary of Defense. In concert with the National Defense Strategy, we are charting a path to achieve and sustain cyberspace superiority to deliver strategic and operational advantage and increased options for combatant commanders and policymakers. Without cyberspace superiority in today's battlefield, risk to mission increases across all domains and endangers our security. Since my last update, almost a year ago, Cyber Command has achieved a number of significant milestones. First, Joint Force Headquarters Doden, our subordinate headquarters responsible for securing, operating, and defending the department's complex IT infrastructure, has achieved full operational capability. Second, Joint Task Force Ares, the organization we created to lead the fight in cyber against ISIS, has successfully integrated cyberspace operations into that broader military campaign and achieved some excellent results. We will continue to pursue ISIS in support of the nation's objectives. Third, we've significantly enhanced our training and cyber operation platforms to prepare the battle space against our key adversaries. And this year will bring several additional accomplishments. Cyber Command will be elevated to a unified combatant commander when I step down later this spring. As a combatant command, we will have the unique responsibilities of being a Joint Force provider and a Joint Force trainer, responsible for providing mission-ready cyberspace operations forces to other combatant commanders and ensuring that joint cyber forces are trained to a high standard and remain interoperable. In addition, in April, we'll start moving into a state-of-the-art integrated cyber center and joint operations facility at Fort Meade. This will be our first fully integrated operations center that enhances the whole of government coordination and improves planning and operations against a range of growing cyber threats. Within this dynamic domain, it's imperative to continually evolve the training and tools of our operators. And we've recently delivered the first of several foundational toolkits designed to enable the cyber mission force to work against adversary networks while reducing the risk of exposure, as well as equipping JTF Ares in its fight against ISIS with capabilities designed to disrupt adversary use of the internet. Innovation and rapid tech development demand competition and the ability to leverage all partners, including small businesses. We intend in the coming year to create an unclassified collaboration venue where businesses and academia can help us tackle tough problems without needing to jump over clearance hurdles, for example, which for many are very difficult barriers. Of course, all these tools require a talented and sophisticated workforce to operate and employ them. The Cyber Accepted Service will help us recruit, manage, and retain cyber expertise in a highly competitive talent market. Our success also remains entwined with continued integration of the Reserve and National Guard. In our headquarters alone, we currently employ more than 300 full-time and part-time reservists. In addition, more than 150 Reserve and National Guard members are mobilized to lead and execute cyberspace operations. Perhaps most significantly, we are nearing completion of the build-out of our cyber mission force, with all teams on a glide path to reach full operational capability before the end of this fiscal year. As the teams reach FOC, our focus is shifting beyond the build to ensuring that those teams are ready to perform their mission and to execute sustained and optimized mission outcomes for the nation year after year for a sustained effort over time. And I fully realize that cybersecurity is a national security issue that requires a whole-of-government approach that brings together not only government departments, agencies, but also the private sector and our international partners. And over the last year, we've also increased our interaction with critical infrastructure elements within the private sector and the broader set of U.S. government partners supporting them. And as you know, I serve as both Commander of the United States Cyber Command and Director of the National Security Agency. This dual-hat appointment underpins the close relationship between these two organizations. The fiscal year 17 National Defense Authorization Act included a provision that describes the conditions for splitting or ending the dual-hat arrangement. And the department is working its way through this question, and ultimately the Secretary, in conjunction with the D&I, will provide a final recommendation to the President. All of us at Cyber Command are proud of the roles we play in our nation's cyber efforts and are motivated to accomplish our assigned missions overseen by the Congress, particularly this committee. And finally, after serving over 4 years as the commander of Cyber Command, and after nearly 37 years of service as a naval officer, I'm set to retire later this spring. And I will do all I can during the intervening period to ensure the mission continues, that our men and women remain ever motivated, and that we have a smooth transition. And I'm grateful for the committee's continued support and confidence of myself and the Cyber Command team, and I look forward to answering your questions today.
Good. Thank you, Admiral Rodgers. Well, in my opening statement, I addressed this, the three agencies' approach that we have responsible for defending against the attacks. So we have the FBI as the lead for law enforcement, the Department of Homeland Security as the lead for critical infrastructure and defending government computer networks, and thirdly, the Department of Defense as the lead for defending the homeland, defending military computer networks, and developing and employing military cyber capabilities. So you've got the DoD, the DHS, and the FBI. No one agency has all the authorities required to defend and protect the homeland. So did we set it up wrong to start with? What does need to be done to encourage a more whole of government? You mentioned that in your opening statement, combating the cyber threats that are out there.
So I think the challenge, as I look at the problem set, and I'm looking at it from the perspective of an operational commander, how do we execute and generate outcomes, if you will? I think it's less an issue of people not understanding what their respective roles are within the structure you outlined. And instead, I think the challenge is, how do we integrate those capabilities into a tighter whole, if you will, that's really optimized to execute at the day-to-day level? I think that's the area where I look at the future, and as I, during with my responsibilities as commander of Cyber Command, that's where I'd like to see us focus our efforts. How do we get down to integrated structures and organizations at the execution level? Because that's where you get speed. And one of the challenges with the current structure, as I said, while I think people understand their respective roles, it is not optimized for speed and agility. And one of the things that I see in the world we're living in right now, we have got to get faster and we have got to be more agile.
Yeah. There's a lot of discussion about the gaps and seams that exist between each leg of the whole of government approach. Now, our adversaries will seek to exploit those gaps and seams and the confusion that follows an attack as various agencies and departments grapple with the scatter of authorities needed to respond. What are the most dangerous gaps and seams as you look at them?
So for right now, the time it takes to deploy capability, the time that it takes to coordinate a response across multiple organizations when those well-meaning and hardworking organizations are existing in separate structures, that's not optimized for speed. Mm-hmm. And to me, what I think the biggest challenge for us is, how do we integrate this more at an execution level? I understand there's a broader policy issue here and a broader legal framework, and that's not my role as an operational commander. But where I see the need for speed and agility is really when it gets down to
Is someone working on that now?
Oh, there's an ongoing dialogue about, so what's the right way ahead? Now, again, I'm the operational commander, so I have a voice
too many people in
that process, and there's no lack of opinions on this topic.
Yeah. Lastly, you had said previously, and I'm quoting now, offensive cyber in some ways is treated almost like nuclear weapons in the sense that their application outside of defined area of responsibilities is controlled at the chief executive level. It is not delegated down. Now, has anything changed under this new administration?
So we're currently again, I don't want to speak for the policy side, but I will acknowledge we are currently in a policy discussion on this very issue. The Secretary of Defense has been very aggressive in articulating this concerns him. That there's an ongoing discussion at the moment that I hope is going to come to a way ahead in the near term. Again, I will get an input into that as the operational commander. I'm not the primary decision maker here. I understand what my role is.
Mm-hmm. All right, good. Senator Reed.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you, Admiral Rodgers, for not only your testimony but your service. I have a series of questions, and I think they require just sort of yes or no answers. The mission of the National mission teams under DoD cyber strategies to blunt cyber attacks against the United States have, quote, significant consequences. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay. The Russia's...
Although, if I could, I'd phrase it as that's an accurate mission for Cyber Command. We haven't necessarily defined it specifically down on the team level, but I understand the point you're trying to make, sir.
Now, is Russia's ongoing campaign to steal and leak confidential information from our candidates and political parties, to plant and amplify misinformation in social media, to break into state election board networks of significant consequence to our national security?
Certainly if successful.
Yes. Do you agree with the DNI Coates testimony that they will continue to conduct cyber operations to achieve strategic objectives unless they face clear repercussions?
Yes, sir, and that was my testimony as well in that hearing.
Is Russia attempting to achieve a strategic objective by influencing U.S. public opinion on elections?
Yes, sir, I believe they're attempting to undermine our institutions.
Now, aside from our intelligence agencies operating under a presidential funding, are there any other organizations other than the Cyber Command Cyber Mission Forces that have the authority and capability to disrupt Russian election hacking operations where they originate? Does the FBI, DHS, or the states, the private sector, have such authorities or capabilities?
You could argue probably only again, that there's a legal aspect to this that I'm not the most qualified, but probably you'd argue some combination of DOD, DOJ have the standing authority in that regard.
But the mission teams, particularly at the origin of these attacks, have the authority to do so.
If granted the authority, and I don't have the day-to-day authority to do that, if granted the authority.
So you would need basically to be directed by the President through the Secretary of Defense?
Yes, sir. In fact, I mentioned that in my statement.
Have you been directed to do so, given the strategic threat that faces the United States and the significant consequences you recognize already?
No, I have not, but if I could flesh this out, I'll say something in an open unclassified. I'd be glad to go into more details.
Yes, sir.
In a classified. Based on the authority that I have as a commander, I have directed the National Mission Force to begin some specific work. I'd rather not publicly go into that, using the authorities that I retain as a commander in this mission space.
So as inherent ability of a commander to prepare, plan,
Yes, sir.
and structure, but you need the direct authority of the President through the Secretary of Defense
To do some specific things.
some specific authority.
There are some things I have the authority, and I am acting within that authority now, not waiting.
But essentially we have not taken on the Russians yet. We're watching them intrude in our elections, spread misinformation, become more sophisticated, try to achieve strategic objectives that you have recognized, and we're just essentially sitting back and waiting.
I don't know if I would characterize it as we're sitting back and waiting, but I will say it's probably, and again, I apologize, I don't want to
Right.
get into the classified here. It's probably fair to say that we have not opted to engage in some of the same behaviors that we are seeing, if I could just keep it.
No, it's one searches for sort of historical analogies, but, you know, we have in the past seen threats building, but at some point, particularly when they've manifested themselves, which they already have in 2016, we've taken action. We've not just continued to watch.
Right, no, we are doing some things.
Let's go back to the brief time I have remaining of an issue that is, I think, consistent throughout your testimony and the Chairman's comments, and that is the technological aspects, which you do pretty well, and the cognitive issues, you know, the message versus the medium. We are all over the place in terms of fragmentation. Is there any effort to pull that together? And let me maybe focus on a specific point. You know, you're trying within DOD to sort of get everybody lined up. Then the SecDef and the administration are trying to line up all the other parties. There's one, you know, from my experience in banking, the Treasury Department has a Fin Center, which is designed to be disruptive of financial transactions, designed to, you know, it's not just ideas, it's money that motivates the...
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So, in your view, are you coordinating with them adequately? Two, do they have adequate resources on their own to be an effective force to disrupt illegal financing and to monitor sanctions?
So I'm not knowledgeable enough about the specific level of capability and resources, but I will say we, both Cyber Command and NSA as well, spent a lot of time working with our Treasury counterparts about developing insights and knowledge through cyber and other means that give them insight that enable them to take action.
Do you think they're effective?
Well, I think the economic broader efforts that I've seen undertaken are positive, and you've seen them against a host of actors out there.
Thank you.
Since a quorum is now present, I ask the committee to consider a list of 1,288 pending military nominations. All of these nominations have been before the committee the required length of time. Is there a motion to favorably report this list of 1,288 pending military nominations?
So moved.
Second. Second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion carries. Senator Ernst.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Admiral Rodgers, in your opening statement, you rightly noted the importance of National Guard and Reserve cyber warriors. And many of those young men and women bring critical cyber skills from the private sector. Very, very important. However, you don't mention how or if the DoD plans to track cyber capabilities found in the National Guard and Reserve Force. And we've had this discussion before, but in 2016, the Government Accountability Office report found that, quote, National Guard units have developed capabilities that could be used if requested and approved to support civil authorities in a cyber incident. However, the Department of Defense does not have visibility of all National Guard units' capabilities for this support, end quote. Last year, I introduced legislation along with my committee colleagues, Senators Gillibrand and Senator Fisher, to correct this oversight. Unfortunately, it wasn't included in the final version of the 2018 NDAA. And as of July of 2017, DoD has not complied with the GAO's recommendation. So, sir, how do you ensure Cyber Command is fully tapping into the expertise of our National Guard and Reserve units when the DoD doesn't have visibility of all of the capabilities within the National Guard? And what more can we do to correct this at Cyber Command?
So I try to work closely with General Lengel and the National Guard Bureau, the National Guard team. I compliment them. They just established and released a cyber strategy, for example, just last month, as a matter of fact. And we were part of that dialogue about, so how do we make sure we're doing, an integrated approach within the DoD here? This can't be an active-only component or civilian-only component. As you and I have previously discussed, the aspects of your question in some ways, are beyond, my immediate responsibilities. What I've tried to work with the National Guard Bureau is, so how do we create a structure that enables us to access the full range of capability, not just units, but to your point, hey, how do you get down to the individual level? It's similar in many ways, putting on my other hat, director of NSA, we've tried to do the same thing over time for language. Many people in the department have language skills that have no connection with whatever their job is that we've trained them to do. And I'm trying to see, can we do the same thing over time with the Guard and the Reserve?
Mm-hmm. Certainly an additional identifier or something that can be tracked. I think we really need to focus on that much more so than we have done in the past, just because of the continuing threat that we see in cyber out there. And, as kind of along this same theme, though, it is such an important part of our national defense, and we're going to have to continue to improve our capabilities and readiness in this area. And so if you could, in just the couple of minutes that I have left, what more can we do to make sure that we have an adequate pool of really talented individuals that can step up into these fields? We've seen at large military recruiting has been very difficult, even for our regular branches of service. So what can we do to make sure that we are filling the gap with qualified individuals that meet the requirements of today's military?
So first, to me, you got to look at it as an ecosystem and realize there's different components to this cyber population, from civilians to active military to Guard and Reserve. Each one of those components has different attributes. So one of the things we need to do is come up with solutions that optimize for each of these subpopulations. So the Congress, for example, with Civilian Exemption Service, the CES effort, that's a big positive for us on the civilian side. On the DoD side, the services for active are working through, are there other compensation tools, for example, that we can use? Are there other things we need to do in terms of the commitment we make to individuals when they first enlist or get commission in terms of can we align them early on and offer them extended service in the cyber arena. On the Guard and Reserve, it's a similar kind of thing. The one that goes to your point, the one thing it's been a little while since I had this conversation with General Lengel, but outside the Army Guard and the Army Reserve and the National Guard, the other services tend to use reserves on a cadre status as opposed to units. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that I'm trying to work with my Guard teammates on, is there a way to both use the unit structure that's traditional within the Guard, but also maybe a cadre kind of thing that gets to your point about how do we access individual skills? We are clearly not there yet, but I'm wondering, is that a part of the future structure that we need to be looking at that we haven't to date?
Right, and thank you. My time has expired, but certainly this is an issue we need to wrangle with and make sure that we're coming up with an appropriate answer. So thank you, Admiral, very much.
Thank you. Senator Nelson.
Admiral, thank you for your public service, your long service, and we wish you well in retirement. Since Senator Rounds is not here, I will speak for him in that we have the privilege of leading the Cyber Subcommittee, and I want you to know that we think the public sectors in the Department of Defense are woefully unprepared and split and segmented and not coordinated to be able to handle now what is one of the greatest threats to our national security, the cyber attacks that constantly come. And we feel that about the private sector community as well. Now, having said that, Mr. Chairman, I want to enter into the record a letter that Senator Blumenthal, Senator Shaheen, and I sent to the Secretary of Defense February the 6th. And one of the things that we ask is that the national mission teams, which are part of U.S. Cyber Command's Cyber Mission Force, should be ordered to prepare to engage Russian cyber operators and disrupt their activities as they conduct clandestine influence operations against our forthcoming elections. Would you enter that into the record, Mr.? Now, Admiral, let me ask you, is there any question in your mind that the Russians have conducted these kind of activities against our past election?
No, sir.
Okay. And in an answer to Senator Reid, you had said, yes, if the Russians were successful, as if there was some doubt in your mind that they had been successful. That's not the case.
No, sir, I apologize. The point I was trying to make, the quote that Senator Reid used was from the strategy where it talked about acts of significant consequence. And I was trying to get to the consequence.
Okay, so we have been attacked, and there are a lot of us that feel like we are still being attacked and that we're going to be attacked, particularly with regard to our elections, which we consider as critical infrastructure. And let the record note that you nodded affirmatively. So what's the holdup?
I'd say there's a series of, and again, this is much broader than the DOD, much broader than Cyber Command. Department of Homeland Security is overall responsible for this particular, the election infrastructure within the segments, the private, that have been identified as critical infrastructure. They're the sector lead. In fact, I've had this conversation with the Secretary of Homeland Security within the last couple of weeks about what we're doing to try to generate insights and knowledge to try to help their effort in their leadership role.
Let me be appropriate and respectful, but let me interject, please, because time is fleeting. Let's get, so for someone who is looking out for the common defense of this country to say, well, they've got the lead and this is that, but I'm the cyber commander and it's going to be a combatant command, that doesn't cut it over here.
Yes, sir. The challenge for us is we have this thing called the law and the legal framework that right now shapes what DOD can and cannot do. I'm not trying to minimize that.
What
It
do
certainly
you
impacts
need,
me
Admiral?
as an operational commander.
What do you need as the commander to say, go after and punish these guys that are trying to tear apart our critical infrastructure? What do you need?
So I'd need a policy decision that indicates that there's specific direction to do that. And then I would need, again, I'd have to tee up the normal way we work this process. I would then be tasked to tee up some specific options, and I'd rather not go into the specifics of any of that. Then they would be reviewed by the Secretary of the Chain of Command. The Secretary ultimately make a recommendation to the President as what the Secretary's views are here. And then based on that, we'd be given specific direction potentially and specific authority.
So you need a direction and a specific authority from the White House.
All right, the President ultimately would make this decision,
From the
in accordance with a recommendation, in my experience, from the Secretary of Defense and others. I would assume the Department of Homeland Security and others would be
So
consulted.
the chain of command is what
Yes, sir.
you need. All right. Let the record reflect that we have written to the Secretary of Defense February the 6th and would appreciate an answer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Admiral, thank you for your decades of service. I remember your testimony last year. You've been nothing but consistent talking about speed and agility. I hope in retirement you'll find a way to continue to nudge us toward that goal. I've got a question to follow up on a couple of questions we've already had today. Recently, the Defense Science Board last year actually and concluded, and there's a quote here, for at least the next decade, the offensive cyber capabilities of our most capable adversaries are likely to far exceed the United States' ability to defend key critical infrastructure. Sir, do you agree with that conclusion?
I mean, we were a part of that effort with the DSB. There is no doubt that for right now, I would argue technology favors the offense, vice the defense. I mean, just what the scope of what you're trying to defend, the scope of potential vulnerabilities are, oh boy, it keeps you awake at night.
So the ability to preclude it is minimal. And you mentioned last year.
We'll preclude it from a technical standpoint.
Yes.
But then that gets into the whole broader question about, are there other activities that could be brought to bear that would convince?
That's my next question is
Yes, sir.
deterrence. You talked last year about deterrence. And so has our ability to deter these types of activities, you know, a nuclear attack, we deter by having the threat of mutual annihilation, right? So in the cyberspace, what is our deterrence capability today relative to where we were a year ago, and is it adequate to defend against intrusion? And I want to add to that specifically, we've had these questions about election. In your mind, are we capable in the United States of defending our election this coming year?
Now, I'm not an expert on the electoral system as a whole. I haven't personally looked at it as a target, so to speak, and asked myself.
Doesn't that speak to the issue? I know Homeland Security is charged with that.
Right.
But is their capability up to your capability in the defense? And then you get inside DOD, you've got each service has their own growing capabilities. So the question I have, and we've all talked around it here, is so who's really in charge of getting the highest and best deterrence, detection, and preclusion capabilities regarding, let's just say, an election as one part of our infrastructure?
So in our constitutional structure, states largely have overall responsible for the execution of an election process within the federal government. The Department of Homeland Security is overall responsible for providing government resources to assist the states in the execution and defense of that structure. Again, that is a DHS lead role. So I don't, in my role as Cyber Command, I'd be the first to admit, I'm not talking to individual state officials about walk me through what your structure is, give me your assessment of where you think you are. I'm trying to generate insights and knowledge now that help inform this with a readiness to, if directed, to potentially do more.
Do you interact with DHS?
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. Second thing, following up on the deterrence capability, what are the menu of options that you and the Department of Defense can give the President should he so choose to respond to these cyber attacks? If we have a deterrent, then the question is there a like response, similar response, and what are the menus, what's included in the menu for the President?
So the first point I would make is, number one, merely because someone comes at us in cyber doesn't mean we should automatically default to, well, we have just to respond in kind. I have always urged we need to think more broadly, look at the full range of levers and capabilities as a nation that we
Have
enjoy.
we ever responded in kind?
There are certain specific steps that have been taken over the course of the last couple of years. You can have an argument about whether they're sufficient or not, but there have been some specific steps taken. And again, I'd rather not get into that.
I understand that, and I wouldn't ask that in an open hearing. But it's pretty obvious to me as one senator sitting here that the diplomatic efforts here are failing, that the activity is really one-sided.
Right, we're not where we need to be or where we want to be. I don't think there should be any
now I
doubt.
want to talk about what can we do about it, and that is to go back to speed and agility. We're going to be about 1.8 million cyber warriors short over the next 5 years.
As a nation, yes.
As a country, both in all three of these, FBI, DHS, and DOD. So the question is, we're not going to win that war against China, for example, in terms of the ability to put cyber warriors in the field. The question is where does technology like artificial intelligence come to bear, and where are we climbing that hill in terms of if this were a trigger puller, we'd stand up a number of soldiers against their soldiers and all that. That's a historical, that's the last war. The future war may be, who's got the best minds focused on artificial intelligence, robotics, et cetera, et cetera. Just on this specific case, where are we in terms of artificial intelligence, and how is that going to help us face the shortfall in cyber warriors over the next 5 years?
So we're clearly looking at what are the technical applications and capabilities out there that enable us to optimize the human capital piece of this that are also, I'm also interested in the fact, guys, as to your point, we are not going to industrial age our way out of this with, well, it's just hire 10,000 more people. That's not going to get us where we need to go, and that's not a sustainable strategy. Therefore, among the things we're looking at, and we're not the only ones, so how can you apply technology to help overcome the human capital piece? The other point I would make is, again, don't just focus on cyber versus cyber. How do we bring this broader range of capabilities in place to convince actors out there, nation states, criminals, non-state actors, you don't want to engage in this behavior, either because you're not going to succeed or because, quite frankly, even if you do succeed, the price you will pay will far exceed any benefit you might gain. Yeah. And that's where we've got to get to.
Yeah, agree. Thank you, Admiral. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Admiral Rodgers, thank you for your service. We will miss you when you retire. I want to follow up on both Senators Reid and Nelson's questions about the 2016 election and the action of the administration. I just want to be clear. As I understand, you said that President Trump has never ordered Cybercom to take any action to defend or thwart Russian attempts to meddle in the elections this fall. Is that correct?
So I said I've never given any specific direction to take additional steps outside my authority, and I have taken the steps within my authority, trying to be a good proactive commander, because my view is
no one from the administration has asked you to take any additional steps.
I haven't been granted any, additional authorities, capacity, capability, and no, that's certainly true.
I understand that to be a confirmation of what I just said. Is that correct?
I thought that's what I apologize.
Okay. Right. It's come to my attention that the Department of Defense contracts with IT companies that share sensitive source code data with Russia and other hostile governments while they do business overseas, and that this practice risks exposing sensitive underlying codes within our national security platforms to hostile governments. And as I understand, there aren't any safeguards like disclosures to protect against these risks. Can you confirm whether that's the case and what the role of Cybercom is in ensuring the safety and integrity of DoD's platforms?
Right. So first, Cyber Command has no direct role with non-DoD, with civilian users here, if you will. Now, having said that, I'm aware of this issue, and we have worked with others in the department to try to address, okay, so what are some of our key vendors and providers doing here? There have been several instances where I've actually dug into execution level, walked me through exactly what you've done with your code, walked me through exactly who had access to it. I want to compare this version that you tell me you shared with them versus what we currently are using within the DoD. I've done that in a couple instances. But your point goes to, and several of you have raised it already, gone to a broader dialogue about what should the nature of the relationship be between the department and its key infrastructure in this digital world that we're living in. And it just forces us to step back and look at things very differently to me. We never used to think about things 10 years ago about who are you sharing source code with? Who are you doing your testing with? In the world we're living in now, those are the kinds of discussions that we've got to have. Who are your supply chain providers?
So who has the responsibility to decide that? If it's not Cybercom, is it the Secretary of Defense?
So the Defense Security Service has overall responsibility within the DoD for the interaction with our cleared defense contractors from a cybersecurity perspective. And I will partner with DSS. The FBI is also involved here. One of the discussions that currently I'm raising within the department is experience teaches us, I think we need to step back and ask ourselves, do we have this model optimized? And I won't go into the specifics, but there's a specific scenario we're working our way through right now that I'm trying to use as an example of this is why we need to make some fundamental change. And I'm glad to talk about that in a closed.
So should Cybercom have that responsibility, or should someone else have it?
I don't know. Quite frankly, one of my challenges, you just look at the things we've talked about in the last 40 minutes where you have said to me, hey, why doesn't Cyber Command do this? Why doesn't Cyber? And I'm going, the challenge for us is about prioritization, aligning mission with resources, and trying to figure out what's our role with a broader set of partners. And so one of the points I try to make within the DoD is be leery about viewing Cyber Command as the end-all, be-all for everything. If we try to do everything, we're going to sub-optimize ourselves. So we need to focus on what are the priority areas.
And that makes sense to me, but the concern I have is who's in charge. And unless there's somebody who's responsible for coordinating activities, for dealing with what Homeland is doing and what Cyber Command is doing and what DoD is doing and what the White House is doing, nobody's going to be in charge.
Yes, ma'am.
And so it seems to me that that's a challenge that we have right now. And as you look at what our both defensive and offensive strategy is around cyber for the United States, do you believe that we have that strategy in place? And could you articulate that either now or in a closed setting?
I mean, I believe that
we can understand.
I believe we have a structure in place with well-defined responsibilities. But as we said previously, my argument would be, I think experience is showing us that we need to be mindful while we understand that structure, is it generating the outcomes that we want? And my answer would be, we're not where we need to be. So that would argue doing more of the same is not necessarily going to generate different outcomes. Even as I acknowledge I have a narrowly defined role, but I try to, along with others, act as a look, we need to focus on this area.
Well, I would certainly agree. I don't think a structure and a strategy are the same thing. And while we may have a structure in place, it doesn't seem to have produced a strategy that's easily understandable.
Ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That's a statement. I'm not asking for a response.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Admiral. It's nice to see you.
Ma'am.
Admiral, the NDS highlights cyber's importance, I think, quite a bit. And how does that National Defense Strategy's prioritization of long-term strategic competitions with Russia and China impact Cybercom's mission?
So I like the fact that the strategy expressly calls out cyber as a domain. The strategy also expressly calls out the fact that we've got peer competitors and near peer competitors in here that we have to, within the cyber arena, that we have to be capable of dealing with. I also like the fact that the strategy specifically calls out competition. I'm trying to remember the phrase. It's competition below conflict, at a level below conflict, you know, the so-called gray area, which I think is very powerful. That gray area goes to much of the discussion we've had so far this morning, this activity that is occurring short of armed conflict, if you will, that is generating strategic advantage for others and not in our best interest. I like the fact that the strategy acknowledges we are living in a world where this is now becoming the norm, and we have got to figure out how we're going to deal with this.
And as we look at that continuing focus with our peer competitors, with Russia and China, I think that means we're going to have to do more with less, and we may see less of a focus on other areas where in the past Cybercom's been very focused, whether it's with global terrorists or with Iran and their proxies. So with those trade-offs, I think that brings a lot of risk. How do you propose that Cybercom and the department are able to handle that type of risk?
So within the last year, I and others made an argument, and the Secretary brought off on it, where I said, look, we need to increasingly treat Cyber Command as a high-demand, low-density resource, where we have to acknowledge there's not enough capacity to do everything we want. So we need a prioritization, a risk-based model about how we're going to allocate our capabilities, and we got to continually reassess this. Just like we do with ballistic missile defense, with ISR, with soft forces, we shouldn't be viewed any differently. And so we put a new process in place. I just made an argument and was granted authority to reallocate some of our capability against some of the challenges you've already talked to me about within the last 40 minutes or so. That didn't exist a year ago. That process didn't exist. It wasn't envisioned. The thought was the cyber forces that we had created would be permanently aligned. I argue that's just not going to, there's just not enough. It's not going to get us where we need to be.
Do you see that increased focus on a high-end fight? Is that primarily going to impact the training, or is it going to impact operations?
It's probably a combination of both. I don't necessarily view it as a binary,
Either or.
one or the other. The positive side, as I said, I've been in command almost 4 years. and those 4 years, I haven't run into a situation where we didn't have some level of capacity and expertise, or some level of capability or expertise. The challenge is capacity. It's, okay, I can deal with this in a reasonable level of places, but if I get into something larger, that becomes a challenge. Now, no one should think for 1 minute, I am proud of the capability Cyber Command has, and I am confident in our readiness to execute our mission, even as I acknowledge that there's challenges.
Okay, when you're talking about capacity, you're building a 6,200 strong cyber mission force.
Sure.
How adequate do you believe that force is going to be compared to the threat that we're seeing today?
So that was based on an assessment. Boy, it's almost 10 years ago now when we did the groundwork about what do we think the structure.
That hasn't really changed.
No. So what we said was, let's build the force out. So as I said, we'll complete the build up by the end of the fiscal year. The argument I'm trying to make now is, so based on the 8 years of actual runtime, that suggests to me that the way that we've structured some of the teams, I would like to change. And I told the services, I will leave this alone until you complete the mission generation. But once that's done, I'd like to retool this a little bit, because I think we can take advantage of the lessons of the last 8 years. I think it also argues we're probably going to need some level of additional capacity over time. And that's something I'll be talking to my successor about. I think that's going to be a key thing for him during his time as in command.
It seems like we hear this over and over again, a lot of the same challenges, and I realize the NDS is out now and it's presenting us with the strategy, but it's frustrating sometimes on our side that I don't know if we're seeing much progress. A last question for you. I was a little confused by an earlier statement, so I wanted to clarify that. You have testified in the past that you do not support creating a special corps or service focused on cyber.
Yes, ma'am, that's true.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Senator Blumenthal.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral, thank you for your service. We will miss you, as others have said. Have you read the special counsel's indictment against 13 Russians and several Russian entities?
I haven't read the actual indictment. I've seen the media reporting on it. I haven't seen the actual indictment.
Well, I recommend that you do so, sir, with all due respect. For us as Americans, it is an incredibly chilling, absolutely terrifying account of an attack on our democracy. You refer to it as a series of actions that, quote, threaten the foundations of our democracy. I think that's a very polite way of putting this act of warfare. In fact, the Russians themselves refer to it as informational warfare. That's from them, not from us. And so I feel a sense of urgency about this ongoing warfare against our democracy that I feel so far is not reflected in the response from our Department of Defense. That's one of the reasons why Senators Nelson and Shaheen and I wrote to the Secretary of Defense last week and asked for engagement of Russian cyber operators and disruption of their activities. And I understand from you that your feeling is you have not been given authority to take additional action. That's correct.
Sir?
Have you asked for that authority?
No, I have not. I've tried to act within the authority that has been granted to me to be aggressive.
Why have you not asked for additional authority?
Because I guess my sense right now is I'm not sure that the capabilities that I have would be the optimal or only response to this.
It
I
may
think we
not
need
be
to,
the
if I could,
only
I apologize.
response, but wouldn't you agree that it is a necessary response?
It could be a part of a response. I would certainly acknowledge that. I just think we need to step back and look at this very broadly, because one of the arguments, not just this current piece, but others, is be mindful of falling in the trap that just because someone comes at us in cyber, that we have to default to immediately going back and doing the exact same thing. I've always believed we need to step back and think a little bit more broadly about it and just don't default. It's because of that, that I have not done that to date.
Well, for how long, with all due respect, are we going to step back and look broadly at this ongoing attack? I mean, literally last week in the wake of the Parkland shooting, the bots, the fake accounts, again and again disrupting, sowing discord, continuing to attack our democracy in ways that most Americans should find absolutely intolerable. May I suggest that seeking that additional authority perhaps is appropriate at this point?
Sir, again, much of what you're asking me, I'm an operational commander, not a policymaker. That's the challenge for me as a military commander.
Wouldn't you agree with me that the president himself is aware of these attacks and should give you that additional authority?
I think the president is certainly aware. Sir, I am not going to tell the president what he should or should not do. I'll use my chain of command to make my recommendations to the secretary as to, hey, sir, hey, within the DOD mission set and within the responsibilities that you have allocated as Cyber Command, here's what I think we can and should do.
Well, without belaboring this point, would you agree with me that the Russians have been in no way deterred from this?
Oh, yes, sir, I think that's true.
They're doing it with impunity. They could care less what we think. They're continuing to attack us.
Yes, sir.
So thus far, the response of the United States of America to this ongoing attack has been completely inadequate.
It hasn't changed the calculus, is my sense. It has
hasn't
not
changed
changed
the
the calculus or the behavior on the part of the Russians.
And it hasn't changed their
Right,
behavior.
that's my sense.
And they've paid no price for meddling in 2016 election or for
They haven't paid a price, at least, that's sufficient to get them to change their behavior.
Well, they haven't paid any price, so far as I can see, have they?
You could argue some of the sanctions that have been imposed. You could also argue some of the indictments. Again, I don't think it's fair to say nothing has been done, although, again, you're getting way outside my lane as an operational commander, sir.
But it has been completely inadequate so far.
It certainly hasn't generated the change in behavior that I think we all know we need.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So the question is, does he think? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Declared war on us. Admiral Rodgers, I do join my colleagues in thanking you for your service, not only in Cyber Command, but also your 37 years of service in the military. You have been asked a number of questions about the Russian interference with our elections and questions about who's in charge. And you testified that Department of Homeland Security is the sector lead on countering Russia's efforts to tamper with our elections. Now, it seems to me, anyway, that perhaps Cyber Command has the best resources and best equipped to actually do something in this area. You are the operational person, but you don't have a specific authority from the president or the or anyone else, for that matter, to go forward. Now, you did also indicate that you are, I believe you used the word constant contact with Department
I said regular. I said I interact with them
regular
regularly.
contact with Department of Homeland Security. And the sense that I have, is that that I wonder what the Department of Homeland Security, which is charged with countering the Russian interference with our elections, what they are doing. So since you are in regular contact with Homeland Security, what have you advised the DHS to do in this area to counter Russia's interference with our elections.
What have I advised DHS to do in the execution of DHS's mission? That's
Yes,
not
have
really.
you given them any advice?
That's not really my role, ma'am.
No, but you are in constant contact. What are you in constant?
So we talk about,
regular
tell me
contact?
what you're
Oh.
doing, tell me how you're organized, what are the capabilities that Cyber Command, for example, could support you with. Those are the kinds of discussions. I also make sure the information flow, are you getting the benefit of the insights that we're generating based on the actions that we have taken?
So
Those are the kinds of
with
discussions.
regard to those kinds of conversations, then is Homeland Security doing what they need to be doing to counter Russian interference, continuing interference with our elections?
You need to talk to them, ma'am. I don't have full knowledge of everything the Department of Homeland Security is doing here. Therefore,
Yes, I understand that.
it would be an ill-formed opinion
I
on my
get
part to assess their performance.
So I'm trying to get at, with all of the resources and the awareness that you have, what kind of specific advice you have given to Homeland Security, because we do not get the impression that they are doing what's adequate to, definitely to counter anything that the Russians are doing, certainly not to the point where they will stop doing it.
Right.
So I hope that at some point in some other committee or in this committee, we'll be able to ask those kinds of questions of the Homeland Security Secretary, because what they're doing with our elections does have an impact on national security, and as you say, they are seeking to undermine our institutions. I'd also like to join Senator Ernst in her focus on the Department of Defense fully utilizing the cyber capabilities of our reserves and National Guards. That's just a statement, and I think you concur with that. As you leave your command, I am wondering what would be your suggestion that your successor, focus on as he or she, it'll probably be a he, take over Cyber Command. What are the things that you would want the new person to focus on?
So this is what I would say to the individual, assuming the nominee is confirmed. You're inheriting in a structure that reflects choices we made 8 to 10 years ago. We need to step back and ask ourselves, is the structure optimized for today and tomorrow? And how do we take the lessons of the last 8 years where we've done a whole lot of activity in the defense, in the offense, working with the private sector? There are insights there that I think we can harness to look at how do we evolve the structure. I'd also argue we need to step back, and you have raised this with me already this morning. How do we better work the DoD role in the defense industrial base and the clear defense contractors? We've got to get a different dynamic here. We've got to look at that differently. And then more broadly, Cyber Command, and again, it goes to some of the points you've raised, Cyber Command and its role, partnering with others. How do we do this in a much more integrated way? That'll be something that I hope maybe I can continue to provide opinions on in my next life.
Yes, how to get an integrated structure for speed and agility. So you have different departments, DHS, FBI, Treasury. Who should take the lead in creating this integrated structure?
Well, that's clearly the role of the administration within the executive branch. That's their task, and I know they're working their way. Again, DoD, we're going to support this. There's an ongoing review right now on the same question, so we'll see what comes out of that.
Is there something that Congress can do to enable one entity, one of these agencies, to take the lead in integrating our structure?
I'd prefer to give the executive branch a chance to say, so tell me what you think the plan is. Now, I'm not trying to minimize the role of the Congress, please, Senator. That's not what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Rodgers, this committee has long expressed concern about the lack of an effective doctrine to help deter cyber attacks before they happen. The FY18 NDAA specifically directed the development of a national cyber doctrine. Why don't we have one yet? We've been talking about this for years.
Right, so I don't want to speak for others. I flat out can't tell you why. The point I'm trying to make as a commander is, hey, we need this, that there would be value, not just for Cyber Command, not just for the Department of Defense, but for the nation as a whole. As I've said, there is an ongoing effort right now. I hope this is going to generate some of the points that you make. I think it's frustrating to all of us. It's not because of willful ignorance or neglect or negligence. But we clearly haven't put ourselves where we need to be.
Is it even possible to achieve cyber deterrence when we don't have some sort of public-facing, articulated cyber doctrine that gives our enemies pause?
Well, I think deterrence has multiple components, from capabilities to a sense of, what we can and can't do and what we will and won't do. So I would also argue, let's not think
So
for
we
what,
have some inherent deterrent
Right.
value in our capabilities.
Yes,
but
sir.
If we had an articulated doctrine.
that would also help.
Through some, that pointed out that there would be consequences, would that increase our deterrent
I
ability?
think that would increase it, but I also, I apologize, the other point I wanted to try to make was, but don't think a strategy in of itself is the panacea. I think it's an important
Yeah.
component of where
Absolutely.
we need
tools.
to be, but it's the tools and the underpinning as well. Once you get that framework, then it's, so what do you do to actually get to actionable outcomes?
So right now, as my colleagues pointed out, the Russian state continues to use bots. They continue to use trolls and other basically information warfare tools to sow division in this country.
Yes, sir.
Sow doubt. Has our response been adequate to create any sort of visible deterrence to those activities?
It clearly has not changed their calculus. It's not changing their behavior.
I think that draws just sort of a fine point on we need to be doing everything we can right now to increase that deterrent value because it's not being effective. Let's take a hypothetical for a moment. Tomorrow, there's a nation-state cyber attack against our power and energy sector. It results in power outages. It results in oil and gas pipelines shutting down. Take a moment and assume that the other decision makers, folks at DHS, as well as the administration, are in agreement that this is a hostile nation-state attack and who it's coming from. The White House wants to respond in the cyber domain immediately without talking about what that looks like. Are you ready?
There are so many variables in what you do. So who's the actor? What kind of capability was used? What specific way are we looking to defeat or overcome? It's one of those, I apologize.
Are you
but
confident in your tools and your team to be able to respond immediately?
the tools are optimized for specific actors and specific, again, I apologize, I don't want to get into the specifics of this.
I don't want to give you specific actors, but you know.
Right, but
Talk about it.
the capabilities are optimized for specific actors and specific configurations in many ways. So there's so many variables. The other thing in all this is, time. It's one of the reasons why I think we've got to get a much more integrated day-to-day approach to this. Because one of my challenges is, look, my experience as a military commander teaches me doing discovery learning when I'm moving to contact, I'm being told, hey, I want you to forestall the following adversary. If the first time I've dealt with this potential adversary is in the scenario you've outlined, then I'm doing a lot of discovery learning as I'm going to contact. That
Let's
is
make the
not
assumption that
optimal.
it's somebody we've been planning for a long
Right.
time.
Then that's a little different scenario. And again, it depends on the
You
specifics.
mentioned a
but-
few in your
Yes, sir.
initial testimony.
That there are capabilities for us.
Okay. You have talked for years about sort of your top three cyber concerns, critical infrastructure, data manipulation, and attacks from non-state actors. Just quickly compare how you think we're doing on those three versus how you viewed them from a risk point of view when you first took this job. How's it changed?
So first, critical infrastructure, there's greater recognition of the problem set, which is good. I'm not spending a lot of time now saying, hey, this is something we need to be focused on, but I would still argue it's uneven. Some segments very advanced, doing some great work. Other segments, not so much. The second area was, I apologize, was data manipulation. My argument would see, boy, are you watching that unfold now in the world around us? It goes to the influence piece. I would argue that has gotten worse because now you've got a major actor, and they're not the only ones in the form of the Russians, who now it's a conscious part of their strategy, and they're doing it on a regular basis. So there I would argue we've gotten worse. And the third was?
Non-state actors.
Non-state actors. That one, that surprised me a little bit in the sense that while and I'm not talking criminal, because I would argue criminal activity is still the greatest single segment of activity from a threat basis within the cyberspace arena. That has not taken off quite as much as I thought it would, to be honest.
I'm over my time. I apologize, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Admiral Rodgers, thank you so much for your service and your multiple appearances here. I was interested that in the aftermath of the announcements by Director Mueller of indictments of 13 Russian individuals 2 Fridays ago, that the President tweeted out, and I'm just going to use his words. I normally wouldn't use these words, but I'm going to quote him. He said Russia is, quote, laughing their asses off, and he also said, quote, that Russia has succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. I think this is going to be a chapter in our life where we're going to just have to acknowledge we've been humiliated as a country. Our democracy has been humiliated. We've had our pocket picked. We've lost what may be, the first real cyber war that our nation has been in. You can characterize it a lot of different ways, but I think it's going to be characterized as a chapter of failure. The U.S. government failed to protect the U.S. democracy. And I want to ask you, based on your lengthy experience in this position, but really your lengthy experience in service to the country, where is the source of that failure? Was the failure a failure of imagination? Was it a failure of will? Was it a failure of policy? Was it a failure of structure? Was it a failure of personnel? Was it a failure of leadership? Was it a failure of investment? Was it more than one of those things? We can learn from failure, and we should, so that we can improve. But I think the history of this, especially the 2016 election, which has now led to 19 indictments or guilty pleas by individuals and another 3 indictments or pleas by entities, it's going to be viewed as a chapter where the U.S. government failed the U.S. democracy. And I want your best professional judgment in what may be your last appearance before the committee in this particular role as where the source of that failure is so that we can fix it.
So I don't think there's one single source of failure, but I'll share some thoughts with you. So first, one of the things that's always struck me is if you go back several years, we tended to define critical infrastructure from a very industrial age approach. Hey, does it produce a product, a service, an outcome? So for example, using that methodology, we didn't say to ourselves our electoral process is a critical infrastructure for it, because we're thinking that there's no product or service, so to speak, that it tangibly generates. I mean, there's votes and outcomes. So the first thing I was struck by is we need to rethink what does critical infrastructure really mean to us in this digital age that we're living in. Secondly, I think, again, I've been in the job for a while. I've been part of multiple administrations. I think the thought initially was, we'll go to them, we'll tell them we have awareness of what we're doing, and this will convince them, and we'll take some initial steps, and we'll convince them that they should stop.
Mm-hmm. Underestimating an adversary.
Right, that clearly has not happened. I don't think we anticipated what level of sustained aggressive behavior we were going to see over time. Mm-hmm. That this wasn't viewed as a one-off. Hey, it was just about one particular election, one particular outcome. That clearly we're looking at a nation now who views this as a strategic imperative over time for them, that there's value to be achieved in continuing to do this. I don't think we necessarily initially looked at it that way. And then the final thing that comes to my mind is, and it's symptomatic of cyber as a whole, what do you do when we're dealing with a challenge that crosses so many different lines? So, as I said, in our structure, elections are a state process. Mm-hmm. Cyber capability, DOD, DOJ, DH, that's the executive. That's not state, that's a federal and it's an executive branch. You look at capability in the private sector. One of my takeaways is cyber is going to force us to think outside the traditional lines that we use in in defining problems and aligning resources.
Let me ask you one more question. Sure. I was a mayor and a governor. Mm. Why should local officials or state officials today believe that the United States government will protect the United States democracy in future elections? Because as I talk to governors and local officials, they have very grave doubt whether the federal government will act in any way to protect the electoral system from attacks such as those that Russia conducted in 2016. tell them why they should have confidence that the U.S. government.
Well, first, I don't interact with them, but as a citizen, my attitude would be, look, I hope one of your takeaways is here, while the system is imperfect and clearly has not achieved the outcomes we want, it is not because there aren't motivated, hardworking individuals trying to do things. And that, hopefully, as you've said, you know, we want to be a learning, adaptive nation here, where we learn and change over time. And that's what I'm hoping we're going to see in the coming months and years ahead of us. Because this is not, hey, all we got to worry about is we'll deal with this in 6 months or a year. That's not the way this is going to work, I don't think.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I'm going to try to, I know this ground has been gone over, but first of all, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
You've been terrific. I'm a big fan of the work you've done. But I'm going to try to channel a woman who came up to me at the grocery store not too long ago. She asked me a simple question: is Russia at war against our democracy? What would you have said to her in the grocery store?
Well, a war is by definition has a specific legal document aspect to it, and I'm not a lawyer. What I would probably say to her is, there shouldn't be any doubt we're in a competition with these guys, and they're trying to use every tool they have to gain advantage, and some of that advantage they want to gain is by undermining our very institutions.
That's a lot of words. I said yes.
So I like to talk to people. I apologize.
I mean, I just got to tell you, they came after our democracy.
Yes, ma'am.
I can't imagine anything more essential to the United States of America than our democracy. So the next question she asked me, are we strong enough and smart enough that we can keep them from doing this again?
Yes.
Okay. So then the next question she asked me, I said the same thing. The next question she asked me, are we doing that right now?
We're taking steps, but we're probably not doing enough.
Okay, so she wants to know, and I want to know, why the hell not?
Ma'am,
what's it going to take?
I'm an operational commander, ma'am. You're asking me a question that's so much bigger than me. I'm not trying to duck this. I'm trying to say, here's what my role is. And you're asking me something
It's a problem, Admiral.
Oh, I don't deny that for 1 minute.
You know, the notion that this country came after the essence of what we are, the character and value of our country is all about the democracy. The notion they came after us brazenly, and that nobody can sit in that chair and say, we got this. You guys can do this. You give our America's military a mission, and nobody is better.
Right.
The notion that you have not been given this mission to stop this from happening this year is outrageous. It is outrageous. And there's no question that they know we're not coming after them. And frankly, your response to Senator Reid's question about Cyber Command disrupting their interference, you said we have chosen not to engage in the same behavior as Russia. But defending is not the same behavior as Russia. Preventing and deterring is not the same behavior. They came after us. We're not asking you, are you going after them? We're asking you, have you the authority? Have you the command to stop them from doing this again to us in 2018?
I cannot operate out of the DoD information network, ma'am. On a daily basis, I do not have the authority to do that. I don't have the legal authority to defend a state's voting infrastructure.
Well, I'll tell you, Admiral Rodgers, if you don't have the authority to defend our voting structures, then we've got the ability to fix that. Correct? I believe, Mr. Chairman and Ranking Member, we have the ability to fix the law to give you the authority to protect our voting systems. Because I guarantee you the Secretary of State of Missouri doesn't have an ability to go after Russia.
Right, yes, ma'am.
I mean, they can harden, but they can't go after them. The only entity that can go after Russia is the United States military. That's the only one. And the fact, I mean, effectively, maybe Department of Homeland Security can help around the edges, but their primary mission is not to go after a foreign nation. It is, in fact, to protect the homeland.
But again, I would argue, respectfully, think beyond just cyber and responding in kind. There's a whole economic, political, there's a whole breadth of tools that we could potentially apply here to try to shape the Russians' behavior and their choices. I would just urge us, don't default to, we got to go after them in cyber. I'm not arguing that cyber isn't a potential part of a broader strategy. I'm not trying to
I just
that
never
for 1
thought I'd
minute.
see the day, honestly. I never thought I'd see the day that Russia would go after the heart of our country.
Yeah.
Ever. And that we would be sitting here parsing words about whether or not we've got this. I want somebody with your experience and your courage and your tenacity, I want somebody to sit in that chair and say to the United States of America, we've got this. And until we have that moment, Russia is winning. And that is disgusting.
Yes,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Guess what question I'm going to ask?
Sir. Will this be a Russian-associated question? Or will it be?
And a deterrence-related question.
Yes, sir.
On December 23rd of 2016, the Congress passed the National Defense Authorization Act. In it was a section that required the Secretary of Defense to file a report on just the questions we've been talking about within 180 days, which was June of 2017, about the definition of a cyber attack, what would be the response. It talks about operational authorities, what operational authorities delegated to the United States Cyber Command for military cyber operations, how the law of war applies, the whole list. The purpose of the amendment, which was in the law, which is in the law, was to establish a clearly articulated doctrine of response in this kind of situation. I'm asking you, as an operator, have you been tasked with drafting any part of the response to this requirement, which, by the way, is now 8 months late?
I've been part of the dialogue about responding, particularly on the operational piece of this. In terms of overall responsibility, this is the Office of the Secretary of Defense has the responsibility for.
But I'm asking,
replying
is
to this.
anybody working on this? We're 8 months in. We're 8 months late now.
I apologize. I don't know the specifics of the timeline for this.
But were you given a deadline saying we need this by June of 2017?
I was part of this. I don't remember. I honestly don't remember if we were given it. Can I take this one as an action?
Yeah, but here's what's frustrating is here we are still talking about this issue when the Congress made a specific instruction to the Secretary of Defense, and the President, by the way, was then required to respond to the Congress within 180 days from that report that should have been coming in June of 2017, hasn't come. So, you know, we're way late, and we keep talking about this. You and I have been in probably a dozen or 15 hearings on this, and we don't seem to be any further ahead than we were before. And the problem, as you've testified today, and I think quite accurately and repeatedly, until we have some clearly articulated doctrine of response to these kind of attacks, they're going to continue. If all we do is try to patch our software, they're going to continue. And you know that, and I know that. What's it going to take? Is it going to take the destruction of the electric grid or the financial system in order for us to finally get to the point of taking this seriously?
Like I said, sir, there is an ongoing, and I'm participating in this. I just apologize. I just don't know the specific timelines.
Yeah, and I'm not. I understand you're an operational guy, but you have to understand you're the nearest thing we have to talk.
I know my role.
You're lucky enough to be here today, but this is serious business.
Yes, sir.
Well, let me turn to a little more specific question that I think underlines what we're talking about here. What would happen today if you, on your way back to your office, got a call and said the U.S. financial system has been taken down, all the computers on Wall Street are off, the markets are in chaos? I don't mean from a policy point of view. I'm talking about what would be the execution? Who's in charge? What would the results be?
So DHS would have overall responsibility for the provision of federal support in response to this. My role would be help to make sure I understand, number one, who is the actor? So can we identify who did this? Because if I'm going to respond, I have to know who I'm responding to or what I'm responding to. So one of my first questions as Cyber Command would be, Let's make sure we understand what's the characterization of activity, who's the actor, what did they do,
Who would take the lead? Who's in charge?
how did the DHS would have overall responsibility.
DHS would be in charge?
Sure.
Have you war gamed this?
Yes, sir. In fact, I made it a broad reference that the finance sector, for example, the scenario you posture here, we've actually undertaken some very good tabletops specifically as I reached out to DHS and the financial sector, and look, we have got to get down to execution level work here, team. So
Well, that's, and
We've
you've
done-
repeatedly talked about integration, and what worries me is that whether anyone is in charge, and I guess a follow-up is, do we have a serious red team war game process to be sure we're not surprised about how to react when one of these things happens?
I don't know if I'd use the phrase, do we have a serious red team? Is this part of our mission responsibility? Yes. Is this something we train and exercise against? Yes. Is this something we continually assess, looking for indicators of this type of activity before it occurs? Yes.
Well, I want to thank you. This may be our last time to talk about this, and thank you for your service and your straightforward response always. And just leave you, and you know, I hope as you leave this job, you will leave a memo behind that says, we are not adequately prepared. We need a doctrine. We need it to be publicly available. We need our adversaries to know that if they strike us in this realm, they're going to be struck back. And it may not be cyber, as you say, it may be a whole range of things. But right now, we have not done that. And I deeply hope that this is something you can take on as a kind of exit interview.
Sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Admiral Rodgers, thank you for being back before the committee. Could you just give me a brief description in your tenure in the current role, where you think things have got, tell me the positive things that have occurred and the things that you wished you'd made more progress on in your time in the command?
So the positive thing, among the things that jam out at me, it's cyber's integration with other operational commands, particularly CENTCOM, SOCOM, some things we're doing out in the Pacific with the Pacific Command. That has been a real strength. That's something I knew it was a good day when you have those commanders publicly talking about what Cyber Command is doing. And it's not Cyber Command talking about, look at all the great cyber things we're doing. Shouldn't you like what we're doing? That's been a real process. Some of the command and control structures, JTF Ares that we put in place, how do you build a structure designed to integrate capability so we can generate effects against ISIS? Was a slow start because we were starting from ground zero, but it has really taken off. That has worked out very, very well. The campaign planning and the structure from a planning perspective that we've put in place, particularly that's been a focus for us over the last calendar year, that's just some great work. That really sets the foundation for the future and gets cyber into a much more traditional, hey, look, we're no different in our mission set than CENTCOM is and what they're, in terms of the mechanisms and the framework they're using to plan, or what European Command is doing. That's a real positive. If I ask myself, what are the areas where I would, and the force generation, I mean, we're going to beat the timeline for FOC. That took a lot of work by a lot of people. The areas where we're not as far along as I wish we were, tool and capability development and who's going to do what. We've still got to work this out between what's the role of the services and what's the role of the command. You have given us, the Congress has given us some acquisition authority. We've started down that road. I think that's a real positive, but we got to ask ourselves, so what's the future here?
Do we have the timelines on acquisition right with the nature of the developing technology? In other words, are we compressing the time to new capabilities to a point that you feel comfortable?
So we're never where we want to be. But I like the fact that there's been recognition we need to do this outside the traditional acquisition framework, which is really built to generate these capital-intensive capabilities that take a decade to develop. That's not our model. That is not what we need. So I like the recognition of this. It's an area the Secretary's asked me to take a look at over time, so this will be something I'm going to comment on before I leave. I've got some thoughts I want to share on this.
How well have you done on personnel recruiting and retention?
So if you look at the uniform...
As chair of the personnel subcommittee, I'm particularly interested in other things that we should be doing as we look at the NDA, specifically around personnel issues.
So if you look on the uniform side, I'd say we're probably exceeding our expectations. It doesn't mean that it's perfect. The biggest challenge for me in the 4 years has been less the military uniformed component, and the civilian piece is proving to be harder. Retention, recruitment, part of it also now is the process. When it comes to the military, we've got a lot of people coming to us, many of whom have skills that I can apply in cyber. In the cyber world, it's much more about going out and trying to find people with the right skills. It's a little different dynamic, and so the civilian piece has probably proven to be harder.
Well, that's something that we're always interested in things that we can do to make that easier.
Yes,
It's
sir.
very. I can't imagine how you compete with the likes of the firm that I worked with on recruiting and retaining some of the top talent. I could go and build a new capability in 3 months that you could take 3 years to do. And I think that we have to continue to look at that. These highly talented people want an environment where they're moving at the pace of the threat. And that's the last thing. Since the time you started this role, well, how would you describe the number and the nature of threats that you're dealing with today versus when you began?
State actors have gotten more aggressive, not less aggressive. The breadth of capability in many states that have concerned us is growing. You can look at the level of it. I mean, we publicly talk about Russia, China, Iran, North Korea. You look at the level of investment they are making, it is significant.
And how well, last question, how good have you gotten at knowing what we don't know? And I've talked about this before in prior committees, the latent capability. There are a lot of people who express frustration because when we see malign behavior on the part of maybe a state actor or some other organization, the idea is to go out with some sort of a proportionate response in the cyber world. The thing that concerns me with that is we really don't know what we don't know about latent capabilities that could ultimately be brought back to us. Are we at a point where we have any better or more holistic idea of what the latent threats are out there?
I mean, we're
in private sector or within the whole of government?
I mean, we're better, but on the other hand, just as a broad...
They're better too.
Right. Just as a broad operational principle, one of the things I constantly tell our team is you must assume we have imperfect knowledge and we must be capable of acting on imperfect knowledge. So don't come to me telling me, hey, we think we totally understand. My experience teaches me it doesn't always work that way.
Well, thank you. And again, encourage you to get any feedback to the committee staff and in my office on anything that we can do, at least on the recruiting and retention piece for any resources going into the NDA.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you, Senator Tillis. Let me just make one comment here before we're going on to Senator Peters. I was thinking during this less than complimentary comments that have been made. I just returned last night from 13 days in PACOM. Everyone from Admiral Harris, Shaughnessy, all the rest of them I've talked to, all the way around to and including on the DMZ between South and North Korea. So all the principals there, I have to say to you, and this is PACOM, they're very complimentary of the work that you've done and the progress that you've made. Senator Peters.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Admiral Rodgers, it's wonderful to have you here again, and I'll join in saying thank you for your service. We're going to miss you. It's been great having you before this committee, and I've appreciated your attention to this issue and personally talking to me about a variety of issues as well. I'd like to talk a little bit more about the future of warfare and the future of technology. There's been some questions related to machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is going to change everything, not just at the military space, but at the commercial side. I am on the Commerce Committee, and we recently had a hearing on artificial intelligence and how that's going to change business and commercial activities in general. And I asked one of the leading executives of one of the leading technology companies in the country, what did he fear most about artificial intelligence? We had a hearing primarily of all the positive aspects of it, but I asked him what did he fear. And I was actually surprised by his answer. He said his fear was the manipulation of elections and the manipulation public opinion that can undermine democracy, which I thought was a very interesting response from a leading tech company. And so I wanted to ask you a bit about that in the Department of Defense and more broadly, our posture when it comes to investing in these technologies, and how are we working to increase innovation and work with those commercial companies to integrate it into defense systems. And I guess I'll ask you that question as well. What do you fear if we don't get this right? What is our fear of an adversary acquiring machine learning and AI systems in advance of our own capabilities?
From a military perspective, my concern is you potentially lose speed and knowledge. That's a terrible combination as a warrior. Like speed and knowledge are advantages for us historically. And one of my concerns is if we're not careful, AI potentially gives opponents speed and knowledge better than ours. If we're not careful, I'm not arguing that's going to happen, but I acknowledge we got to look at it. What was I apologize.
That's it. And I guess I want to pick that up because this technology is moving through the commercial side even faster than through the military side. So in the past, oftentimes military research would be a leading factor. That's not necessarily the case here at all. And I'm worried in particular about our adversaries that are able to come in and actually buy those technologies, particularly from startup companies. I'm working right now in trying to fill some of the gaps on the Testifies process, which is the Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States. You basically have foreign entities that buy companies, perfectly legal, get that information, and they use it not just for commercial applications, but also figure out ways to weaponize that type of technology as well. So my question to you is how can we better integrate the missions of Cybercom and the NSA as to it relates to the CFIUS review process? Are you concerned about it? What should we be doing to make sure that we are protecting this intellectual capital that has significant national defense potential?
I'm not concerned about the review process in terms of NSA role and Cyber Command. Again, it's one of the advantages of we're so physically co-located to each other. My bigger concern goes to what you've already said. CFIUS, to me, is a reflection of an environment of the past, not today, in the future. And it is very clear to me that some nation states have spent a lot of time studying the CFIUS process and have developed strategies to overcome it. Hey, I don't have to worry about buying the corporation outright. So tell me what your overseas subsidiaries are, tell me what your providers are, tell me who else has access to this intellectual property, so to speak. I'll acquire that. And things like that, CFIUS is not set up to do, it wasn't what we built it to do. So I applaud your efforts we need a different construct. We don't want to get rid of CFIUS, but I think we need to think about it more broadly about the national security challenges of foreign investment in areas with national security implications for us.
Is there a role for Cybercom to be more actively involved in some of that process, providing information? I mean, you'll be aware of what's happening, things that you're concerned about. Right. How do you see a potential role there, if any?
I think it's much more an intelligence. So my role on the NSA side, because we're tasked with generating knowledge and insight, is much greater. Cyber Command feeds that effort, because one of the things we do is we generate knowledge and insight on the Cyber Command side based on what we're doing. We're putting out reporting, so that goes into the broader effort, but it's not a primary mission for Cyber Command. It's much more a primary mission on the NSA side.
Great. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Admiral, thank you for your 37 years of service.
When you say that, I just feel, it just sounds old.
No, you should feel proud. Feel strong. You probably picked up on a theme today that this committee feels a sense of urgency about the Russian threat to our elections. This is not a personal criticism of you.
No, I understand.
We're frustrated that this administration has not lived up to its responsibility to do something about the Russian cyber action. Now, you told Senator Blumenthal and Senator McCaskill that not every cyber attack requires a cyber response. So I'd just like to follow up on that just a little bit here. The Pentagon cybersecurity strategy says, and I'm going to quote it to you, in response to certain attacks and intrusions, the United States may undertake diplomatic actions, take law enforcement actions, and consider economic sanctions. So I want to focus for just a minute on that last piece, sanctions. Congress overwhelmingly passed a law last year that in part required sanctions on individuals and companies that knowingly engage in malicious cyber activities on behalf of the Russian government. Those sanctions include freezing access and restricting travel. The Trump administration has not imposed these required sanctions. Admiral Rodgers, I know that this is not your primary responsibility to impose the sanctions, but I want to ask a different question. What message does it send to Vladimir Putin that the United States has not fully implemented sanctions to counter known Russian cyber attacks?
You know, more broadly, not just the sanctions, but more broadly, my concern is I believe that President Putin has clearly come to the conclusion there's little price to play here.
Bingo.
And that therefore I can continue this activity.
Yes.
Everything, both as a director of NSA and what I see on the Cyber Command side, leads me to believe that if we don't change the dynamic here, this is going to continue. And 2016 won't be viewed as something isolated. This is something will be sustained over time. So I think the challenge for all of us is, so what are the tools available to us? And as the strategy says, diplomatic, economic, some cyber things, there are tools available to us. And again, I think in fairness, you can't say nothing's been done, but my point would be it hasn't been enough.
It hasn't been enough?
Clearly what we've done hasn't been enough. And,
That's right.
You know, I'm mindful of my role as an operational commander. But
yeah, no, I appreciate that. It hasn't been enough. It doesn't do us any good to have tools in the toolbox if we don't pick them up and use them. You know, Russia will keep trying to interfere in our elections. And if the Trump administration doesn't fully implement sanctions, then we're not using every tool we can to effectively deter Russia from undermining democracy in the future. Let me ask you one other question, if I can, Admiral. It's clear that the United States needs to step up its cyber game, and I want to follow up on a question from Senator Tillis. We've previously discussed the question of how to build a skilled cyber force, and you said that improving DoD's network defenses and building a cybersecurity culture depends on our ability to attract the most talented people out there. This committee is now considering reforms to the Defense Officer Personnel Management Act, or DOPMA, another one of our great acronyms. Love to talk about DOPMA, which governs how we recruit and retain our military officers. So with that in mind, Admiral, if you could make just one change to DOPMA to help attract the right technical talent for the cyber jobs of tomorrow, what would that be?
I'd want to make sure within a military construct, and to be honest, we use the phrase DOPMA because it sounds terrible.
I always think
in a military standpoint, it would probably be, and the services are working their way through this, but I think we want to make sure that we have got a mechanism for a professional cyber force across a career, that this can't be viewed as something we do. Hey, we give you training, you do it for a few years, you go do something else, you know, then we bring you back, then you're gone again. That's not going to get us where we need to be. And the services are all, because they do man, train, and equip, you know, they provide capability that I as a joint, and that includes people and other things, but that I as the joint commander then harness to achieve specific mission outcomes as a joint commander. That would probably be the biggest thing.
Okay. It's actually very helpful to know. I know that the 2017 defense bill gave the Pentagon a lot of flexibility in how to recruit, but I remain concerned that our recruiting system is so focused on recruiting for the military of today that we're not effectively targeting the best talent and best suited talent to execute the missions we will face tomorrow. And so how we think about that, I think, is really important.
Yeah.
So thank you again. Thank you for your service, and thank you for your help.
Thanks, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. It's the chair's intention to go ahead and close the meeting after a few remarks from the ranking member. Is there objection to that? All right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have just very specific points I want to clarify. First, there are ongoing Russian director-inspired cyber operations against our electro system as we speak? Yes, sir. Yes.
Yes, sir. I'm speaking to you more as NSA than as Commander of
Right.
Cyber Command, but yes, sir.
Two, with the authority or the direction of the President of the United States, national mission teams can disrupt these attacks at the point of origin. Is that correct?
We could be tasked to do that. Again, it depends on the specifics.
But it's
I don't want
legal.
to overpromise.
It's legal and it can be done.
Sir.
Have you been asked to make a recommendation to, with respect to deploying these teams?
No, but I've certainly provided my opinion. Nobody's necessarily directly asked me. I certainly have provided my opinion in ongoing discussions.
What is
about
your
this.
opinion?
Again, my comment has been be mindful of just defaulting to the cyber piece here. I'd like us to think about this a little bit more broadly, and I'd like us to think about, so how does this potential cyber piece that Cyber Command could play, how does it fit into something broader?
So let's just conclude. You have not been formally asked for a recommendation.
No, sir.
You have expressed your opinion to the Secretary of Defense and to the White House about the possible uses of this, but not in any formal way.
Yes, sir. I haven't put anything in writing, for example.
And I guess final point, and this goes, do you feel as a professional officer you have an obligation to make a formal recommendation to this?
I feel that the system provides me the opportunity to provide my recommendation, to provide my insights, to provide my opinions, that people listen to what I have to. I acknowledge there's other opinions out there. I acknowledge there's other perspectives, but I feel very comfortable in the fact that there's been a dialogue on this topic and that dialogue continues.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Thank you, Admiral.
Thank you, and thank you, Admiral, for your straightforward answers and for your patience on this, perhaps your last event here. We are adjourned.
Thank you.